Federalist Paper 51. One of the 85 essays penned by James Madison, Alexander Hamilton. And of course, we had John Jay assist with some. Marcellus, a philosopher, in his Defensor Paxi, says that authority to make laws should not belong to one man, as in with a monarch, because out of their ignorance or their malice, they can create law looking to their own benefit rather than others. And therefore, in turn, they will affect, right, and imbalance the whole system as a whole, right? And so that's one thing he calls tyrannical behavior. For example, we've seen that over time, whether you're talking about China with some of the revolutionary policies that led to millions of people who died, right? Even if they meant good, there was not enough consensus, enough checks on executive power. Maybe Russia's Ukraine war. Was it just Putin heavy-handedly deciding as a chief executive, I want to go to war, and the legislative branch and the judiciary could not check him and to review whether the plan would actually work, right? So Marcellus adds further that even if you move away from one person, power should still not reside in an oligarchy or an aristocracy. It should not reside with a small group of individuals, because out of their folly or their malice, they themselves can create laws that only benefit them and may hurt the whole. So, Federalist Paper 51. If angels were men, we would not need government. We would not need to create a government to manage human society, because we will be divine beings, right? We will be inherently good in every way, okay? We'll have perfect peace, right? But even maybe in texts, maybe angels themselves may require government. Furthermore, if angels were to govern men, neither checks and balances would be necessary in government. Why? Because people will govern well. And that is one of the greatest mistakes of most governments in the world, right? If we go back to Locke, right? We've left the state of nature. We've gone through a social contract. We've consented to be governed. We've created the most powerful public institution in human civic society called government. Now the government is powerful and governs the people, because at the beginning we had to create government to govern men in order to be able to enjoy all the fruits of our social contract. Now every country in the world, whether you talk about North Korea, Vietnam, Cuba, United States, Russia, France, every country created a type of social contract. When they were going through their revolutions, they didn't go through revolutions and war wanting to live in hard countries, in countries where they don't have liberty. For a significant group in that country, they believed their lives were going to be significantly better, that they were going to enjoy the fruits of their labor, right? But is that the case in every country? No. In fact, in many countries, that's not the case. Because while it's one thing to theorize the creation of a new system, and that system will govern the people, what is difficult and what most countries have not been able to figure out is how to cause this most powerful institution to be governed or to govern itself. And so these three gentlemen have the task in 51 of explaining why the form of government that they are proposing will be one in which the people could be governed without being abused or having their liberties taken from them. So they argue, to what expedient ends then shall we resort for the maintaining in practice of the necessary partition of power among the several departments? And by departments they mean the branches. The only answer that can be given is this, that exterior provisions are found to be inadequate. What are exterior provisions? External checks. How can these people keep their government in line from the outside? Maybe a referendum, maybe voting, right? But do they vote in other places in the world? Yes. But what happens when they vote? The government simply overrides their vote. What happens when they protest? The government gets the military and crushes them, right? So they're inadequate because trying to keep government accountable from the outside is very limiting. So what do? You have to keep government accountable from within. How do you do that? By contravening interior structures of the government so that its several constituent parts, by their mutual relationship, may keep each other in their proper places. That's what we call checks and balances, right? So we want to create a government in which each one of its partitions keeps each other in line. So the legislative branch, the executive branch, and the judicial branch, all by their mutual relationship, are supposed to keep each other in check, because we cannot keep the government in check from the outside because it is too powerful, right? And so that is 51. So external controls, we already talked about them. Internal controls, examples. For example, FDR realizes that it is a norm that you have to serve only 2 terms. There is nothing that's barring him in the Constitution from serving more terms. So FDR stayed in office for 4 terms. He died in his 4th term. He might as well have ended up being Xi Jinping of China, Putin of Russia. He could have been a life president, or Yoweri Museveni of Uganda. He could have been a life president maybe. But as soon as he died, soon after, the Americans at the time, the leaders at the time, passed the 22nd Amendment to make it definitively clear that in this country, they don't want life presidents, right? That no matter how good a dancer is, that dancer should leave the dance floor at some point in time. And so, in that case, 2 terms for each president, right? And each term of 4 years, okay? And so, that became the core thing in the United States, okay? Amongst many other provisions we see over time, okay? So those are called internal controls, things we built in the system to make sure that bad actors don't jump in. Now, I usually like to say America was created for devils, not angels, structurally. Now, what do I mean by that? I mean, the structures were created so that even the most nefarious bad actor could take power, but they couldn't topple the whole system. While I would argue in many countries, they create systems expecting their leaders to be angels. And they don't have enough checks and balances in their system. Now, what is a check? A check is what we've described. The fact that each branch is separated and they can check each other. A balance means that each one is relative in power, so that none of them overwhelm the others. That's another thing. A lot of systems may have separations. They have executive branch, judiciary, and legislative branch, but they have no balance. So one overrides the other, right? And so a check, a measure, right? It's an offensive measure, so that if the executive branch does something that they're not supposed to do according to the Constitution, the judiciary can step in, right? Or somebody can sue the executive branch for acting outside its power. Right? The judiciary can step in and look at legislative laws if they cross the threshold of their mandate. So defense means the ability to thwart encroachment, right? The ability to stop one branch from entering the powers of another branch, and that's what we refer to as encroachment, right? That ambition must counter ambition, the interest of one man to the other, right? And so in 51, they talk about the fact that by nature, these politicians always want to increase their power. They always want to pass their own policies, all right? But no matter how good a policy you have, no matter how much you want to change an issue area, the question is, do you have the legal authority? Is it your jurisdiction? Do you control the authority within that jurisdiction? If you don't, it is not your responsibility, nor do you have power to touch that area of law, right? And so whenever encroachment happens, it's important to continuously keep that balance, right? When a nation becomes unbalanced, as we see in many countries, usually the executive branch, where you have the president or the prime minister, etc., they overwhelm the legislative branch and the judiciary, and so they do whatever they want without much checks and balances, right? So balance is very important. Prevention of encroachment is very important, right? And the reason to separate and to balance the system, ultimately, according to the Founding Fathers, is because they want to maintain the liberty of the people of the United States. Now, remember, there's a difference between a civil right and a civil liberty. Civil rights is about the due process of the law. The fact that as citizens, law is applied equally. So I'm not going to treat this side of the room different than this side of the room under the same law, right? Everybody is treated equal under the same laws of the same country. Civil liberties is about how I as the government treat the citizens and how much power do I have in terms of engaging the citizens. Do I have the power to just go into your house and take your technology, right? So whenever the government becomes all powerful and becomes all tyrannical towards the citizens as a whole, that's a liberty issue. That's what they're preventing, a liberty issue, right? So, authority, jurisdiction, I already talked about that, that each one of the branches should have its own authority, its own jurisdiction. Now, ultimately, all these three branches are supposed to be selected by the fountain of authority. What is the fountain of authority? We, the people. So, the people, they are the fountain of authority by which all these branches should be chosen. Now, in reality, do we, the people, get to select these three branches directly? No, right? The legislative branch, we do, okay? Constitutionally, it was only the House of Representatives. Around 1913, the 17th Amendment, I believe, the Americans now constitutionally choose all of Congress directly. Then, the executive branch, well, that's indirect, right? It's a little bit of an elite way around. America is the only democracy in the world, I believe, where they don't choose their presidents directly. The Electoral College chooses the president, but nonetheless, it's an indirect choice by the people. Judiciary. In this case, the American people absolutely do not choose the federal judiciary. The federal judiciary is different from state judiciary. So, the president, the executive branch, nominates people, okay? And then those people are vetted by the Senate. After the Senate vetting, then they take their positions. Now, why is this the case? According to Federalist Paper 51, the Founding Fathers asserted that because of the issue area, it's handling law and cases, not just anybody should enter the federal judiciary. They wanted people who are qualified. So there are levels of qualification. In today's world, we can say law degrees, having practiced as a lawyer and judge, etc. And so there is a level of experience that we expect, or somebody who understands how to make good judgments in law. All right. So there's the qualification part. The other part was insulation. They didn't think it's a good idea for judges, unlike state judges, the federal judges, to follow politics, to run for office, right? And so federal judges are insulated from political pressure through life tenure. In other words, they're in office for life. So even if a president nominates me and I become a Supreme Court judge, they'll leave office, I'll still be in office, and future presidents will not have as much control or of my decisions. So I become a very independent agent in that regard. At least that is the claim. Now, recently there are those who have argued that maybe Supreme Court judges should have term limits, right? They should, or should have, maybe they should serve for 15, 20 years. That's more than enough. Or even maybe less, maybe 10 to 15 years. So there's proposals that they should serve for a limited amount of time, but that's besides the point. So courts have qualifications that you have to meet, insulation from political pressure, okay? And that's why they're selected and chosen differently. We don't elect them directly. Now, for the state court system, which is different, we vote for judges at the state level in different ways depending on your state. Now, in a republic, when you're trying to create balance, by the nature of republicanism, there's actually no inherent balance. Because most of the power has moved in a republic to the legislative branch. So this is actually how it looks like. There is no balance. They make the laws. They actually can override the executive branch and pass the laws. They're in charge of money. They may be in charge of war. So the legislative branch overwhelms the other two branches. Okay? And that's a challenge. And the question is, what do you do? So the invention thereof is that in a Republican government, the legislative authority predominates. And the remedy for this inconvenience is to divide the legislative branch more. Remember, you keep separating. So in this case, we separate the legislative branch into two. And we render them with different modes of election and different principles of action, and as little connection with each other as possible, so they don't work together. We cause the House of Representatives and the Senate to be very different, so they don't work together. So the House, they run for 2 years. The Senate, they run for 6 years, right? So senators will behave differently than members of House who are continuously running for office. The House is in charge primarily of the power of money, the purse, right? The Senate is in charge of executive business. That means ratifying treaties, vetting federal officers before they take office, right? So some of the actions are different, right? And a law must pass both chambers before it becomes a law of the United States. So there's vetting on one side and the other. So by doing this, ambition counters ambition. The same way the three branches were keeping each other in line, now the Senate and the House keep each other in line, and it restores balance, and we are back to a condition in which now the executive branch, the legislative branch, and the judiciary have relative balance within their separations, right? And that reduces encroachment and keeps the system balanced, right? And so that's Federalist Paper 51. The reality that while, according to Locke, men may be relatively good and tolerant, but they're not perfect. And therefore, we must have checks, but not just checks, we must also have balances within the system. And if we do that, therefore, we can maintain the liberty of the people. And so that is Federalist 51 that helps us understand the roots of the American structures and systems.